we're actually going to look at some information to help with your physical activity log for the class. And I do it here in the lab because there's not room to squeeze it into the class schedule, and it actually comes from a chapter that we cover much later in the semester in class. So I think the new chapter number is 14. I think it's the aerobic and strength training prescription chapter. So that's where this information is coming from. And what we're going to look at are measures of intensity for aerobic work. So if you remember in your physical activity log, you're trying to log anything that's aerobic that you do. It doesn't just have to be your planned exercise if that's aerobic, but also anything you do during your day that will count as aerobic activity. So you're trying to log all of that and see if you can meet, or preferably best, the guidelines from the DHHS, all right? And one of the things you have to be able to do is identify whether the work you were doing was moderate or vigorous intensity levels. Okay, intensity is a measure of work rate, right? So am I working moderately hard, or am I working pretty hard, very hard, right? So moderate and vigorous intensity. So that's what we're going to look at today. How do you measure that so that you can put an accurate measure into your log for your portfolio? Why is it taking so long? Uh-oh. It's doing a whiteout thing. Not responding. It's not helpful, is it? Again. Sorry about that, it kicked me out. Let's try that again. That's better. That's what we need. Okay. All right, so one of the best ways to measure intensity is using your heart rate. Some of you have specific heart rate monitors, or you may have a fancy Fitbit or an Apple Watch that monitors your heart rate. A lot of you have clever fancy phones where you can download an app and put your finger on the camera, and the app will tell you what your heart rate is. So it's, and then at the end of the day, if you don't have access to any of that, you can just take your pulse. So it can be a relatively unpainful way of looking at intensity. Most people have access If you're working with clients, most people are going to have access to their heart rate in one form or another, okay? So it's a great place to start. It also doesn't lie, right? You can't, like, your heart rate tells you how hard you're working, period. So that's a very useful tool, because some of the other things we'll look at, you can see have an element of error, bigger element of error built in, okay? So we can calculate, estimate our heart rate max, right? So one way of estimating heart rate max is just to say 220 minus my age. And that number is your heart rate max, and then you're going to work out a percentage of your heart rate max, okay? Slightly more accurate estimate is 207 minus 0.7 times your age. If you look online, there are a couple of different versions of that equation. There's a 208 one, a 209 one, but this is the one that's in our textbook. And it's still an estimate of your heart rate max, but it's more accurate than the 220 minus your age. The only way to get your true heart rate max is to do a stress test in a lab, either on a ergo bike or on a treadmill, hooked up to a computer. That's the only way to get a true picture of it, which most of us don't have access to, right? So this is our backup plan, right? And then very nicely, depending on the program that you're using or that you're working from, that program may be set in percentage of VO2 max, and VO2 is your oxygen consumption at the cellular level. So how high your ceiling for VO2 max is somewhat of a representation of your capability for doing aerobic work. So often programs are set at a percentage of VO2 max rather than a percentage of heart rate max. But very usefully, heart rate and VO2 have a linear relationship. So we can very easily transfer one measure into the other. It is important to note that whatever percentage of your heart rate max you're working at, the percentage in a VO2 max would be a lower number. So for example, on this bottom line here, 70% of your heart rate max equates to 50% of your VO2 max or VO2 peak. All right? So the numbers, you can't say, oh, if it says 70% VO2, I work at 70% of my heart rate. Right? So although it's a linear relationship, the numbers don't line up exactly. That's important because if you transfer to 70% heart rate max, you're going to be working under the intensity level that the program has set you at, okay? And then you won't get the outcomes that you're looking for, all right? Intensity is probably the key variable for achieving your goals, right? Doesn't matter whether your goal is fitness, you know, I want to be able to run further, faster, or whether your goal is fat loss or muscle gain. Getting the intensity right is a key point to achieving any goal you set for a training program. All right? So another way you can use your heart rate is to actually transfer it into a number that represents a percentage VO2. And that's called the heart rate reserve method or the Carbonan method. So if you use this version of your heart rate data, then you would, at 70% VO2, you'd be working at 70% of your heart rate reserve. So I'll just talk you through that in case you want to use that version. My personal favorite is percentage heart rate max. But so here we can estimate the heart rate to work at a specific percentage of VO2. So if I go back here, so if my program says 85% VO2, that isn't 85% of my heart rate max. What would my heart rate be at 85% VO2 peak or VO2 max? Right, that's what we're looking for on this second method. Okay, so your heart rate reserve is your heart rate max minus your heart rate at rest. And then your target heart rate is the heart rate needed, so the percentage of your heart rate reserve needed to meet the percentage VO2. And so we can calculate heart rate ranges for percentage VO2 or heart rate ranges for percentage heart rate max. So your target heart rate is your heart rate at rest, no, that's not right, plus your percentage heart rate reserve. So if I'm working at light intensity, that this would be 30 to 40%. If I'm working at moderate, 40 to 60. If I'm working at high intensity, it's going to be 60 to 90. All right? So if I want fitness gains, we want to train, I think 40 is a little bit low, but it depends on the individual you're working with. I would probably go 50 to 85 or 50 to 90 if they're in very good shape. Right? If we're working for fat loss, this intensity is too high. All right? So we'll look at that a bit more closely in the classroom when we get to that. Now, another option we have for measuring intensity for aerobic work is the Borg scale. And I have recently read a paper that investigated using the Borg scale for resistance for weight training work as well, although that has not historically been the typical way to use it. All right? Typically it's used as an aerobic measure, but as I said, there's been some research looking at how do we use it for weight training as well. And I think I put that article up, but I will try to remember to double check, and if I didn't, I will load that article. So the Borg scale is what we call a rating of perceived exertion, an RPE scale. So the first problem here is that it's not a physiological measure. It's a perception of how hard I'm working, okay? The research is quite clear that you should not use a Borg scale or an RPE scale. There are a couple of different versions with beginners, because when people don't have very much experience with moving, they tend to overestimate how hard they're working, all right? So that could be for a number of reasons. It could be that they're not very fit, right? So it feels like very hard work. It could be that they're overweight or obese, and it really feels like hard work, right? So beginners or people who are inexperienced shouldn't use an RPE scale. If you are an experienced mover, so either you're an athlete or you're someone who has done a lot of training in their life, then the research says that the Borg scale is a pretty good, a pretty accurate measure of intensity, right? Assuming that you're honest with yourself. And that's, I wouldn't ever use a Borg scale because I'm pretty sure I would cheat, right? I would say, oh yeah, I must be working at 13 when I know really I'm working at 11, right? So I'm sticking with my heart rate because I can't cheat if I'm looking at my heart rate, right? So here on this sheet we've got, here's the RPE scale. The typical Borg scale runs 6 to 20. There are scales you can find that run 1 to 10. So 6 is rest, I'm not doing anything. And 20 is too hard, I'm going to fall down and maybe die, right? So somewhere between 7 and 19 we're aiming for here, okay? If we were at a percentage of our VO2 peak or our VO2 max, you can see the equivalent numbers here, percentage heart rate max, and the percentage VO2 heart rate reserve should equate to the percentage VO2 peak. It doesn't quite on this chart. I don't like this last column because it should be the same as our VO2 peak. That's the whole point of that heart rate reserve measure. One, two, three. So our fourth measure of aerobic intensity that you will see in the literature, and it has become quite popular relatively recently over the last, I don't know, 5-6 years. I've seen more research papers and more general, like training magazines and things use METs. MET stands for metabolic equivalent task. And so, again, when we use METs, unless we are in a lab and hooked up to a computer, we're really estimating how hard we're working, all right? One MET is how much oxygen I need to sit down and do nothing, right? So, on average, that is about 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. A little bit more for a very big muscular person, less for a small, less muscular person, but on average 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. So that's one MET. So 3 METs means I'm working 3 times harder than I am when I'm at rest. Okay? So 3 by 3.5 is 10.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. Right? The larger the MET number, the higher the intensity, the harder I'm working versus what I'm doing when I'm at rest. Okay? So it has some limitations because it really doesn't take into account environmental factors such as altitude or heat. It does not take into account skill level of the individual because someone who is highly skilled at moving uses less energy, needs less oxygen than someone who is a beginner at that movement skill. So METs can be used as a guideline for training, but they don't take into account, you know, the point of training is to get in better shape, and as you get in better shape, METs doesn't really take that into account easily, all right? So there are some issues, again, with using METs in my view. You know, please remember I am not an exercise physiologist, all right? So when I approach these subjects, I am looking at them from a purely applied, hands-on, someone who is not an exercise physiology person. Okay? And to me, right, using a Borg scale or using METs because I'm estimating how hard I'm working, not measuring how hard I'm working. And I'd rather measure it and get it right. Okay? But that's my personal preference. As I said, it's highly likely that if you get a textbook that is for, like training programs for swimming, that they've got a Borg scale or METS, because I can't take my pulse and not drown at the same time, right? So, it depends what event you're in, really, I think. There's a place for these other measurements. They're just not the ones that I would use for myself, for what I do, for my health, right? So, here's my heart rate max. If I'm working at less than 35%, that's very light. 35 to 59 is considered light. 60 to 79 is considered moderate. 80 to 89 is heavy. And more than 90% is very heavy. Right? So, again, depending on who you are working with, it might be unlikely that you set, now if you're a competitive athlete, you probably will do some work at 90 or above. But if I'm a person that's just trying to stay healthy or lose weight or just get in shape, then why would I work that hard? It hurts, right? I'm not interested in working that hard personally, right? So, doesn't make me lazy, just means that, that's a previous time in my history, okay? So, next
question, ma'am.
Sure.
So basically, this chart is based on heart rate max that we get by subtracting 207 or 220 from our age, right?
Other way around. Take your age from 220.
Oh, okay. And that's honestly what I meant. But anyways, I wanted to ask, like, if I want to get more accurate and I want to make, let's say, like a vertical run, which I want to try and get to my heart rate max, how do I know where is my heart rate max? How do I know where to stop, basically?
Right. So, it's not very often that we, like, if you're at your heart rate max, that's the most hard work you could possibly do, right? And you can't keep that up for any length of time. So typically we don't aim for heart rate max. The best way is to have a heart rate monitor. They're not that expensive. If you don't have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, I like a Polar monitor. I have a Polar strap, so it's got the strap and the monitor, and then I have a watch that flashes what my heart rate is. And there's always an element of error in any mechanism, right? But that's pretty accurate, and that way I can stay precisely in the training range that I want on any particular day, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
The 220 minus your age is less accurate than the 207 minus 0.7 times your age. So I would use the slightly more accurate measure. The other option, if we ever get you guys back on campus, is to go to Dr. Barlow's lab and he'll run a VO2 max and heart rate max test on you. And then you'll know what your real heart rate max is versus an estimate of your heart rate max. One of the problems with the estimates is the error measure in there. So for example, I'm 57, so 220, that's 170, that's 163 is my heart rate max, right? But that overestimates my real heart rate max. Because I know if I set my program at a percentage of 163, I'm struggling harder than I should be at that work rate. So there's always individual differences. It might be underestimating your heart rate max. And then you're not working hard enough for the percentage that you've set yourself, right? So getting a true physiological measure in a lab is the best way forward.
I don't want to sound stupid, but I still have a question.
Sure. It's not stupid. It's excellent.
How do I know how much I can still go? I mean, how do I know what is my limit?
Right. So, well.
Like, how does the lab test gonna know how much more can I go?
Okay. So, all right. Maybe I'm not answering your question. Let me try this.
I'm sorry, I might not be.
No, it's an excellent. No, it's an excellent question. So let's say that you go to Dr. Barlow's lab and he runs a stress test and he tells you that your max heart rate is 196. Right? Beats per minute. Okay? So, when you're running, if you have a heart rate monitor or an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or any of those, then you can watch your heart rate. Right? So, let's say I know you're in really good shape and you want to do some work at 95%. You wouldn't set a 1%, you would set a range for the run, right? So let's say you want to do a training run that is going to go from 88 to 95% of your heart rate max. Right? So you would times 196 times 0.88, and you would do 196 times 0.95, and that would give you your training range. Am I answering your question?
I will try and ask you again later on your office hours because I don't want to interrupt the class.
Oh, that's okay. We're kind of at the end of the material anyway, so it's quite an interesting discussion to try to work out.
So I'm down to go on because my question is basically not how I calculate where should I work at, but how does the machine knows what is my max heart rate?
Oh, when you're running.
How does it know?
Okay, when you're doing the stress test?
Yes.
Okay.
How does it know that 196 is my max heart rate?
Okay, so the way they run the stress test is scientifically validated to get to this point in time. So Dr. Barlow would put you on a treadmill because you're a runner, not a cyclist, right? So he would use a treadmill. And he'll hook you up to the computer and he'll give you a warm-up and then he'll gradually start increasing the incline every now and then, right? So he's looking for a particular number of your VO2 to then increase the intensity of the workload. So and the way he increases the intensity is to increase the incline on the treadmill. right? And
So
so,
it's kind of have a pattern, right?
sorry, say that again, Neri?
So it's kind of like it has a pattern, right? If I follow the pattern of how much my O2 changes in relation to the time and the intensity, then we know that that's my heart rate max, right?
Yeah, so he'll just keep going. So what he does is he'll get you to a point where your heart rate and your VO2 aren't really changing very much. And he'll push you a little bit harder, and then he'll tell you to keep going for as long as you can. And then you hit exhaustion and you have to stop. And then he can, from that data, he can extrapolate your VO2 max and your heart rate max.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you so much.
Okay? Yeah, it's really an interesting test. I'm hoping, well, I have a
Does
piece...
he also do that test with the lactic acid?
I am not sure. He might do.
That is interesting.
He might do. Because the lactate curve is an even better measure of aerobic capacity than VO2 max, which we will come to in,
sure.
yeah, we'll come to in class. I have last semester, because we didn't have any students here, Dr. Barlow ran a stress test on his son, and we have it on film so that you guys can see what it looks like. So if I have to, I'll run that film again later in the semester. I'm hoping that maybe we can perhaps go in and see one like on Collaborate rather than a video, but we'll see. It depends what his allowance of people and things like that in the lab are by the time we get to that point in the semester. So yeah, I'll show, you will get to see what that VO2 test looks like. Let me put it that way. Okay? All right, so that information will support your deciding what's moderate and what's vigorous for your portfolio. Okay? Remember that your aerobic work does not have to be exercise. It can be, but click on the link to the DHHS. There are many other things that count as aerobic work that are physical activity that are not exercise. Okay? So try to look outside the box and think about everything you do during your day that would count for aerobic work. All right? And I'll see you guys tomorrow afternoon.
Have a great day.
Bye!